Welcome back to Rare CoinX PRO. Today we are exploring 4 remarkable Lincoln Wheat Pennies from the heart of post-war America, coins that passed through millions of hands during one of the most energetic and optimistic decades in United States history, and that today tell a story far richer than their 1-cent face value would ever suggest. These 4 coins span the years 1946 through 1951, a time when America was rebuilding, growing, and dreaming bigger than ever before, and the right example of any one of them can surprise even the most experienced collector. Stay with us all the way to the end because our final coins auction record will genuinely delight you. Let's start with our first coin, the 1946 no-mint mark Lincoln Wheat Penny. There are certain coins in the Lincoln Wheat Penny series that carry an almost tangible sense of historical relief, and the 1946 Philadelphia cent is one of them. To hold this coin is to hold a piece of the moment when America exhaled. World War II had ended in the summer of 1945, and by 1946 the country was pouring every ounce of its energy and optimism into peacetime life. Factories that had been producing tanks and ammunition were converting back to automobiles and household appliances. Soldiers were coming home, starting families, buying houses in brand new suburbs, and spending money with a joy and freedom that the war years had made impossible. And in Philadelphia, the original home of American coinage, the mint was responding to all of that economic energy in the most direct way it knew how, by producing copper pennies in quantities that stagger the imagination. In 1946, the U.S. Mint produced 1,505,445,000 Lincoln Wheat Pennies across 3 mints, setting a record for cent mintage at the time. Of those, the Philadelphia Mint alone produced 991,655,000 pennies, the highest mintage of all 3 mint locations that year, making this the most common of the 3 1946 varieties in circulated grades. Nearly 1 billion coins from a single facility in a single year. That is the scale of production America needed to fuel its post-war boom, and every one of those pennies went to work immediately, passing through diners and department stores, parking meters and candy machines, absorbing the texture of everyday American life in ways that no history book can quite replicate. When it comes to history and condition, the 1946 Philadelphia penny carries one additional detail that makes it genuinely interesting for collectors who love metallurgical history. For collectors, the absence of tin in the alloy makes 1946 a unique metallurgical marker, visible in a slightly yellower hue and different toning patterns compared to bronze cents from 1909 to 1942 and post-1947, when tin returned to the alloy. This means the 1946 Philadelphia cent occupies a brief and specific window of composition that distinguishes it from the cents immediately before and after it, a detail that passionate collectors of the series find genuinely fascinating. Since proof coin manufacture had been halted in 1942, no proofs were struck in 1946, and proof production would not resume until 1950, making the 1946 series exclusively a collector of business strikes. In terms of condition and what to look for, the principles that apply to all late wheat cents apply here with particular force. Because the combination of enormous mintage and decades of circulation means that finding a truly gem-quality 1946 Philadelphia cent requires a patient, careful eye. You are looking for a coin where Lincoln's hair above the ear is still individually defined strand by strand, where the cheekbone retains its original 3-dimensional contour rather than showing the flat smoothness that comes from handling, and where the wheat stalks on the reverse carry crisp, readable ribs from top to bottom. And color, as always with copper coins, tells the whole story at the top of the grade scale. Red coins command a strong premium because they have retained their original copper luster, while red-brown and brown examples hold significantly lower values at the same grade. When it comes to background and composition, the 1946 wheat cent is made of 95% copper and 5% zinc, giving it that distinctive warm copper glow that makes well-preserved examples so visually appealing. Victor David Brenner's Lincoln portrait graces the obverse with "In God We Trust" arching above and "Liberty" standing to Lincoln's left, while Christopher Ironside's 2 wheat stalks frame the reverse with "E Pluribus Unum" and 1 cent at the center. His Lincoln obverse and wheat stalk reverse ran unchanged from 1909 through 1958, making every wheat cent from every year part of the same unbroken 50-year design tradition, and there is something genuinely moving about holding a 1946 penny and knowing it shares its design with coins struck 37 years earlier and 12 years later. Collector demand for the 1946 no-mint mark penny is steady and welcoming. At the entry level, circulated examples are so affordable and accessible that they make a perfect starting point for any new collector building a wheat cent date set. At the intermediate level, nice uncirculated examples in red-brown and red condition attract consistent buyer interest. And at the very top of the market, gem red survivors have commanded genuinely impressive results that prove the principle of conditional rarity in the most satisfying way. Known errors on this date include double dies on Liberty and In God We Trust, which can boost value considerably, giving eagle-eyed collectors an additional incentive to examine every 1946 Philadelphia cent carefully. For current market value, circulated 1946 no-mark examples sell for between $77,000 and $150,000 in typical worn condition, while MS-63 to MS-65 examples range from $230,000 to $410,000 with gem red pieces at the highest grades climbing dramatically. A 1946 MS-67 red sold for an impressive $514,950 at heritage auctions, proving that exceptional condition matters more than mintage numbers. $14,950 for a 1-cent coin born in the first year of peacetime America. That is the magic of this hobby at its finest. For collectors, the most encouraging tip with the 1946 Philadelphia cent is to cherry-pick aggressively for color and surface quality. Since the metallurgical composition of this date is slightly different from neighboring years due to the absence of tin, a fully red 1946 cent has a slightly distinctive hue that experienced collectors can recognize, and authenticating that original color through professional grading adds real security and value to your collection. Always store copper coins in archival quality holders away from humidity, and consider submitting any coin that appears to be in gem red condition to PCGS or NGC before selling or trading, since professional certification consistently delivers stronger results. And keep your loop ready for double die varieties on Liberty and In God We Trust, because even a modest doubling can add a meaningful premium to what would otherwise be a common date. Now let's move on to our second coin, the 1949 no-mint mark Lincoln Wheat Penny. By 1949, the post-war economic boom that had ignited such extraordinary coin production in 1946 had settled into a new rhythm. America was building highways and suburbs, television was beginning to transform home life, NATO was being founded, and the Cold War was shaping foreign policy in ways that would define the next 4 decades. And at the Philadelphia Mint, the presses were running at a healthy but more measured pace than the record-setting years immediately after the war. 217,775,000 Lincoln cents were struck at the Philadelphia Mint in 1949 without a mint mark, a substantial figure that places this date in the common category for circulated examples, though notably lower than the extraordinary production years of the mid-1940s. All 3 mints combined for 435.2 million pennies to feed a booming post-war economy, and the 1949 Philadelphia cent represents the most common of the 3 varieties that year. One of the most historically interesting facts about the 1949 Lincoln cent is one that many collectors overlook entirely. The mint struck no-proof Lincoln cents in 1949, as they were focused entirely on circulating coinage, and proof production would not resume until 1950. This means that if you are building a complete proof set of Lincoln Wheat Pennies, 1949 is one of the years you simply cannot fill, which gives the 1949 business strikes a certain completeness of their own as the definitive representation of that year in any serious collection. There is also a wonderfully quirky collector phenomenon specific to Philadelphia Lincoln cents from the late 1940s and early 1950s. It is a web-like staining pattern found mainly on Philadelphia Lincoln cents from 1949 to 1952, caused by a reaction between the copper and certain chemicals used in the storage and transport of coins during this era. Collectors who understand this phenomenon know to look specifically for 1949 Philadelphia cents that have escaped this staining, since clean, unstained examples are genuinely more desirable and meaningful to add to a high-grade collection. when it comes to condition, because 217 million were minted, these are not rare in a general sense. But because many people spent them during the late 40s and 50s, high-quality examples are surprisingly scarce today. This is the paradox that makes the 1949 Philadelphia cent such a rewarding hunt. The coin is everywhere in worn grades but genuinely challenging to find in pristine, gem-red condition. Look for sharp hair detail on Lincoln's portrait, a well-defined cheekbone, and crisp, individually readable grains on the wheat stalks, all presented in a bright, fully red copper surface that has not been touched by toning, spotting, or oxidation. The background and composition follows the beloved wheat cent formula. Like all wheat pennies of the era, the 1949 Philadelphia cent is struck in 95% copper with 5% tin and zinc, weighing 3.11 grams and measuring 19 millimeters in diameter. Brenner's Lincoln portrait and the wheat stalk reverse connect this coin to a design tradition that was already 40 years old by 1949, and yet the design retained all of its dignity and elegance across every one of those decades. Collector demand for the 1949 no-mint mark penny is driven primarily by date-set builders and condition-focused collectors who appreciate the challenge of the gem grades. The 1949 no-mint mark variety actually has a lower survival rate in high grades compared to some Denver issues, making the hunt for a pristine 1949 Philadelphia penny quite exciting for hobbyists. Era varieties also add interest to this date, with off-center strikes selling for $15 to $100 or more depending on the degree of misalignment, and die breaks and minor double dies adding modest but real premiums for variety specialists. For current market value, a 1949 penny with no mint mark is typically worth $55,000 to $120,000 in circulated condition and up to $155,000 or more if uncirculated. At the very top of the grading scale, the most valuable 1949 Philadelphia penny sold for $312,075 at auction in 2006, a record-setting coin that displayed exceptional preservation with full original red copper luster. $12,000 for a 1949 Philadelphia cent. That is conditional rarity in its most powerful and inspiring form. For collectors, the key tip with the 1949 no-mint mark cent is patience. Because high-grade red examples are genuinely scarcer than the mintage numbers suggest, taking the time to examine multiple examples before committing to a purchase is always worthwhile. Look specifically for coins free of the web-like staining pattern associated with Philadelphia cents of this era, and focus on examples where the original copper red luster is both bright and even, without patches of toning or oxidation that could indicate improper storage over the decades. Now let's move on to our third coin, the 1950D mint mark Lincoln Wheat Penny. Our third coin today carries a small letter D beneath the date that identifies it as a product of the Denver Mint, and that single letter opens up one of the most beautifully counterintuitive stories in all of Lincoln cent collecting. Because the 1950D is the coin that most perfectly illustrates a principle that every serious collector comes to understand eventually, that mintage numbers and collector value are often completely unrelated when condition enters the picture. The 1950D Denver Mint circulation strike holds the year's auction record at $20,400 for a single MS-68 red specimen, despite having the highest mintage of any 1950 cent variety. Let that sink in for a moment. The most common variety by production numbers holds the highest auction record. That is conditional rarity at its most dramatic, and it makes the 1950D one of the most instructive and exciting dates in the entire wheat cent series for collectors who want to understand how this hobby really works. The historical backdrop of 1950 Denver is rich with meaning. The Korean War had just begun, and America was once again navigating the uncomfortable tension between peacetime prosperity and military commitment. The year 1950 also marked something genuinely special in American numismatic history. Proofs came back. The mint had suspended proof coinage from 1943 through 1949 to support the war effort, and 1950 marked the return, with exactly 51,386 proof cents struck for collectors. That proof resumption happened at Philadelphia, not Denver, but it cast a spotlight on the entire 1950 cent series and made collectors pay close attention to every variety from that year, including the Denver business strike. The 1950D D Wheat Penny had a total mintage of 334,950,000 coins struck at the Denver Mint, making it the year's most abundantly produced variety by a comfortable margin. And yet, as with every wheat cent from this era, the combination of immediate widespread circulation and decades of subsequent handling means that pristine gem red survivors are extraordinarily difficult to find. Despite high mintage, high-end Denver coins are surprisingly rare in full red, and strong market interest surrounds top-quality D-mint examples, creating exactly the kind of collector excitement that makes hunting for this date so rewarding. In terms of history and condition, the Denver Mint in 1950 was a well-established and highly productive facility, and its 1950 cents tend to show generally decent strike quality. However, the sheer volume of production meant that coins were handled roughly immediately after striking, resulting in the bag marks and contact marks that doom most examples to the lower mint state grades. Finding a 1950D with genuinely clean, mark-free surfaces in full red condition is the challenge that makes the top examples so valuable. Look for Lincoln's hair showing individual, well-defined strands, a cheekbone and jaw with full original roundness, and wheat stalks on the reverse where every grain is crisp and cleanly readable. The background and composition of this coin connects it proudly to the great wheat cent tradition. Made primarily of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc, the 1950D is part of the long-running Lincoln Cent series which began in 1909 and continued the wheat reverse design until 1958. The D mint mark sitting just below the date on the obverse identifies this coin as a product of Denver, a facility that had been striking coins with distinction since 1906. Brenner's Lincoln portrait and Ironside's wheat stalk reverse look exactly as they did in 1909, 41 years of design continuity that gives every wheat cent a shared visual language across the decades. Collector demand for the 1950D is genuinely vibrant at every level. Entry-level collectors find circulated examples accessible and affordable. Intermediate collectors hunting for nice uncirculated pieces in the MS63 to MS65 range find a date with enough supply to make the search enjoyable without being impossibly common. And at the very top of the market, the record numbers speak for themselves. The 1950 cent demonstrates a critical principle in numismatics: conditional rarity trumps mintage, and the highest mintage 1950D holds the year's auction record at $20,400 for a single MS68 red specimen. $20,400. For a penny bearing the Denver Mint mark from 1950. That is the number that every collector of this date carries in their memory, because it reframes what this coin is and what it can become in the right condition. For current market value, the 1950D Lincoln Wheat Penny is worth approximately 6 cents in average condition and can be worth between 74 cents and $2.50 or more in uncirculated mint state condition. At gem grades with full red color, typical 1950D Wheat Penny value at MS65 red coins can sell for $50 to $120, while MS67 red or higher jumps to $1,000 or more, building toward that extraordinary MS68 record that stands as one of the most compelling auction results in the entire late wheat cent series. For collectors, the most valuable tip for the 1950D is to embrace the hunt for conditional rarity with genuine enthusiasm. This is a date where the challenge is not finding the coin, it is finding the coin in a condition that most examples never achieved. Focus your search on original, untouched examples that still show blazing red copper luster, and always use a loupe to check surfaces carefully for the bag marks and contact marks that characterize so many 1950D cents from the heavy production environment of the Denver facility. The repunched mint mark varieties documented on this date are also worth checking for, since with 149 mint mark varieties cataloged, a careful cherry picker has real opportunities to find something special. And now, let's take a look at our fourth and final coin, the 1951 no mint mark Lincoln Wheat Penny. We arrive at our final coin, and it is one that carries a particularly rich and layered story, because 1951 is a year that brings together American history, numismatic tradition, and the quiet but growing collector culture that would eventually transform the wheat cent series into one of the most beloved collecting fields in American numismatics. America in 1951 was a nation navigating complexity with characteristic resilience. The Korean War was intensifying, but at home, the economy was strong, television was transforming living rooms across the country, and a generation of post-war Americans was discovering the pleasures of disposable income and leisure time. Some of those Americans were beginning to collect coins, drawn to the variety and history of the Lincoln Wheat series, and the mint was paying attention. 1951 was just the second time since the war ended that the United States Mint had issued proof pennies, and they issued just 57,500 of these special coins, a tiny fraction of total production but a meaningful signal that collector demand was being recognized and served. The Philadelphia Mint was the highest production facility for the 1951 penny with a mintage of 284,576,000 pieces, identified by no mint mark. That substantial figure places the 1951 Philadelphia cent firmly in the accessible category for circulated examples, but as we have seen with every coin in today's video, the story changes dramatically when you reach the gem grades. The values of a 1951 no mint mark range from 2 cents in circulated grades to $10,000 or more for MS-67 red examples, and the most expensive MS-67 red 1951 no mint mark penny sold for a whopping $10,350 at heritage auctions, proving once again that the right 1951 Philadelphia cent in the right condition is a genuinely valuable and exciting collectible. In terms of history and condition, the 1951 Philadelphia penny tends to be reasonably well struck, with generally good detail across Lincoln's portrait and the wheat stalks, though examples vary and cherry-picking is always advisable. The web-like staining pattern we mentioned for the 1949 Philadelphia cents is also present on some 1951 examples, so looking specifically for clean, unstained surfaces adds an important layer to your selection process. What you want is a coin that has survived 7 decades in the kind of protective storage that preserves its original copper brilliance, with no spotting, no toning, no oxidation, and no contact marks from mishandling or improper storage. Finding that coin is deeply satisfying when you do. The background and composition of this final coin in today's video connects it to all the great traditions of the Lincoln Wheat series. Made from 95% copper, the 1951 Wheat Penny is a popular coin among collectors due to its post-war production and classic design. Brenner's portrait of Lincoln on the obverse and the wheat stalk reverse carry all the dignity and elegance that had defined this denomination since 1909. The Philadelphia coins carry no mint mark beneath the date, the tradition that had identified the nation's original mint since the beginning of American coinage. And the proof coins struck that year deserve particular admiration. Only 57,500 sets were produced, sold exclusively as complete 5-coin sets, and Mint Director Nellie Taylor Ross, the first female director of the United States Mint, oversaw their production, giving the 1951 proof cent a quiet historical significance that goes well beyond the coin itself. Collector demand for the 1951 no mint mark cent is lively and multifaceted. Date set builders need it to complete their Philadelphia wheat cent albums. Condition specialists are drawn to the challenge of finding gem red examples in a year where the mintage was high but gem survivors are genuinely uncommon. And proof collectors find this date particularly rewarding. The 1951 Deep Cameo proof is one of the hardest Lincoln cent proofs to find with that finish, and only one example has been certified at PR 67 Deep Cameo, which sold for $15,077 at heritage auctions in January 2011. Rare varieties add additional excitement to this date. Look for repunched date varieties, which show doubling in the date numerals and can add $10 to $50 to the value depending on prominence and grade. The 1951 Philadelphia penny is known for generally strong strikes with sharp wheat stalk details, making it a rewarding date to cherry-pick for quality. For current market value, a 1951 penny with no mint mark is typically worth 5 cents to 20 cents in circulated condition and up to $5 or more if uncirculated. At the gem grades, the most expensive MS-67 red example sold for $10,350 at heritage auctions, while the proof series offers wonderful value at accessible prices, Standard 1,951 penny proofs typically sell for $20 to $1,500 in grades ranging from PR 62 red to PR 69 red, with the rare deep cameo example commanding over $15,000 as the finest known. For collectors, here are some final and deeply encouraging tips for the 1951 Philadelphia cent. First, always look carefully at the date for repunch date varieties, which are documented on this issue and can meaningfully increase a coin's value. Second, if you are interested in the proof series, seek out the rare cameo and deep cameo designations specifically, since the standard proofs are available at modest prices while the finest examples represent one of the most historically interesting and underappreciated segments of the entire proof Lincoln cent series. Third, appreciate the historical context of this coin. Struck in the second year of the revived proof program, overseen by the first female director of the United States Mint, in a year when America was both fighting a war and building a prosperity that would reshape the world, the 1951 Philadelphia cent is far more than a 1-cent piece. It is a small copper document of a remarkable moment in American history, and that is exactly the kind of coin that makes this hobby so endlessly rewarding. As we have seen today, these 4 Lincoln Wheat Pennies from 1946, 1949, 1950, and 1951 prove that even the most familiar and modest-looking coins in American numismatic history can carry extraordinary stories, hidden varieties, and values that range from a few cents to tens of thousands of dollars when condition, color, and rarity align in just the right way.